Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. You join us this hour as we discuss the upcoming meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and, of course, US President Donald Trump in Alaska. We'll bring you some recent updates now. The Kremlin says the highly anticipated one-on-one meeting between the Russian president and his US counterpart in Alaska must bear results if there is to be a subsequent three-way meeting. They've also stated that the talk will include the participation of their aides. According to Russian state media, the talks could last a minimum of 6 to 7 hours, signaling a marathon session likely to cover a wide range of bilateral and international issues. Earlier, President Putin laid flowers at a memorial in Russia's Magadan, commemorating US-Soviet cooperation during World War II. The gesture comes just hours before his expected arrival in Alaska for the summit with the US president. Now, let's dive into a discussion where we discuss all things geopolitics in regards to this meeting. We're joined by three guests this hour. We're joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky, who's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School. He joins us live from Bulgaria. We're also joined by Rabinder Sachdev, an international affairs expert. He joins us live from the Indian capital of New Delhi. We're also joined by Arvind Marjahan Lamar. He's a savings professor of finance at Texas A&M University, and he joins us from College Station, USA. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on the program. Let's dive straight into this. Dr. Popovsky, Professor Popovsky, I want to start with you. Vladimir Putin is widely regarded as a war criminal, mainly by Western countries, European allies to Ukraine. He does, however, have a arrest warrant out on him at the ICJ, amongst other leaders around the world. Why, if you could explain to our audience, why isn't Vladimir Putin being arrested by the International Criminal Court of Justice? This is an obstacle that he faces when he visits countries all around the world, but why not for this meeting with Donald Trump?
Very, very good question. Yes, he's a suspected aggressor and war criminal. Ideally, he should have been in The Hague, in the International Criminal Court. The answer to your question, Thomas, is that the American president, Donald Trump, currently, pay absolutely inexplicable respect to a war criminal and aggressor like Putin. Just imagine if Kamala Harris was the president of the US. This would never, ever happen. So the answer is very clear. We have one criminal, and by the way, convicted 34 times. Donald Trump himself is a criminal, convicted by an independent jury. 12 jury members unanimously pronounced Donald Trump guilty 34 times. So we have one criminal visiting another criminal. That's so simple. I have no other explanation. Last Friday was the ultimatum that Donald Trump gave to Putin. And instead of following that ultimatum with severe sanctions on Russia, Donald Trump decided exactly the opposite, to invite him as a guest to Alaska. And obviously Putin, a master spy back in the KGB years, will do everything possible to get out of this meeting, out of isolation, to be seen as a legitimate president of the Russian Federation. He will play very big games. He will start talking about global issues. He will present himself as the leader of the global South. He will say, I can organize a meeting with the Chinese president next month. Forget Ukraine, let's talk about big global issues. That will be what Vladimir Putin will do in a few hours in Alaska.
Professor Popovsky, thank you very much. Rabinder, I wanted to come to you next. Sorry. Since the Cold War, India has juggled a historically strong relationship with Russia and also has a blossoming ties with the United States, much thanks to the friendship between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India, of course, will be watching very closely. What do you think, in an ideal world, India is hoping to come out of these talks between the US and the Russian counterparts?
Well, in an ideal world, India would be hoping that this meeting goes well and, a ceasefire is announced, maybe, but that cannot be until Zelensky is there, or a ceasefire is announced and then the talks happen. So there's a lot of stuff out there. But the point is that India ideally would want this meeting to have a positive outcome, because India is under secondary sanctions for purchasing Russian oil. So bottom line, one clear-cut interest for India is that secondary sanctions on whosoever buys Russian oil should be lifted. That is, it would mean that Russia is no longer in the doghouse with respect to its oil revenue. So in an ideal world, that's what India would want. Now, what could happen in this meeting? Essentially, this will be a step to another next meeting. It seems now, Trump is saying that he's going to go in, take a listen, and get a gut feel if a deal in the future can be possible. But essentially, any deal or any arrangement has to have Zelensky. I think there's a chicken and egg situation also going on here. The idea is that have a ceasefire and then talk the various negotiations, or the various negotiations have to be conducted and then a ceasefire. So I think that's the chicken and egg which I would look out for. But barring that, more or less, I think the status quo would remain. Russia would remain under whatever sanctions it is. Russia's oil revenue would, the West, the US would want to strangulate or choke Russia's oil revenue, which means India will have to be facing 50% tariffs in the US market. So that seems to be the near term which India could see, though we would very much hope that the meeting has some positive outcomes so that this ratcheting up of sanctions on India stops at a very tactical level.
Professor Popovsky, let's move on to this meeting. We've seen a more firm approach by the US president in regards to his usage of vocabulary when it came to the Russian president, especially as conflict and Russian aerial strikes on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure continues. I want to take our audience back to February when Donald Trump was seen to ambush President Zelensky in the Oval Office. Some people calling it a kebabbing. What do you think the chances are that Donald Trump does the same thing here to Vladimir Putin that he did to President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and also South African President Ramaphosa as well? We can't forget that incident. What are your thoughts, Professor Popovsky?
Yes, Thomas, you're absolutely right. The only way there will be a progress here is if Donald Trump asks Vladimir Putin to make a phone call to his generals and to order them to stop the fire. That's what Donald Trump should do. He should shake hands, put the photos with the journalists, and then tell Vladimir Putin, I ask you to come to Alaska with one single request. I gave you ultimatum, many ultimatums. 7 months we talk about ceasefire. You do nothing. You continue killing Ukrainian civilians every day. Now, today, 15th of August in Alaska, I ask you to make a phone call in front of me to your generals in Ukraine and to tell them to stop the fire. If Donald Trump does this, and if Putin, under such pressure, agrees to that, that's the only possible outcome. Everything else is absolutely useless. Negotiations about territories, negotiation when, what, how are useless unless Donald Trump make a firm order to Vladimir Putin to stop fire tomorrow. Putin will play. Putin will say, I will promise, we will create working groups, We have a mechanism in Istanbul. We will send our people there. He may even agree on a meeting with Zelensky just to win more time. And later he will say, I will meet Zelensky only after we have agreement. And his team will never reach an agreement. So it will be another cycle of the same thing, what we have seen 7 months. There will be absolutely no result in few hours. And I agree with Rabinder Sajdev that actually this is the kind of a chicken and egg game. Because the question is, what is first, what is second? Without ceasefire tomorrow, there cannot be negotiations of anything without Ukraine and without the Europeans. So the only outcome of this meeting, meaningful outcome, could be if ceasefire follows. I am very skeptical that will happen.
Yes. Professor Popolski, thank you. Do stay with us. We have some breaking news coming in. A statement from the Russian delegation, where Russian envoy Dmitriev has said that upcoming talks aim to restore US-Russia relations and not just address the economy. He added the discussions will take in the full spectrum of bilateral issues, not just limited to Ukraine. Dmitriev described the mood ahead of the Putin Trump summit as combative. We're now joined by anchor and correspondent Joshua Barnes to give us further context on this statement from one of Vladimir Putin's delegation. Joshua, the context behind these comments?
Well, yes, absolutely, Thomas. Of course, there is a lot set to be discussed at these meetings, which we've heard may last up to 7 hours. Of course, Donald Trump's flight out of Alaska set to go at around 5:45 p.m. That would give us potentially 7 hours of discussions. And there is a lot to look at here. Of course, sanctions have been a big comment from the United States throughout recent weeks. Threats of sanctions, secondary sanctions as well. And there are, of course, going to be conversations about the economic ties between Russia and the US in the face of instability. But this situation as well could involve safety and defense and geopolitical security. Let's look at recent action from the US president and his administration. He moved 2 nuclear submarines to within what he called a reasonable area within sort of range of Russia. This was of course seen as a provocative move, but Russia themselves have spoken about potential use of nuclear weapons throughout this conflict. Now, whether that's just been rhetoric to try and scare the West and Ukraine and Western allies or not, there is definitely a boiling point of tensions here involving both Russia and the US at the core. So discussions around a potential nuclear deal, with their current nuclear deal set to end next year, that is expected. And of course, conversations on Ukraine as well. But Russia posing this as a real bilateral meeting with loads of different ramifications and not just a Ukraine peace summit. It'll be interesting to get some reactions from, of course, European leaders who are really concerned about how this might leave Ukraine after the summit, given there have been security guarantees from the US, but we know how Donald Trump can often make statements that change depending on who he has spoken to. So a lot to discuss, lots of senior officials from both countries set to discuss so many different topics, but on the agenda, of course, mainly the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We look forward to bringing you all the updates as we get them.
Thank you very much, Josh, for providing that context. We now move over to Rabinder Sachdev. Rabinder, your reaction to that statement from the Kremlin saying that these talks are not just for a Russia-Ukraine peace deal, but are in fact, they aim to establish better Russian-American ties. Do you think that the Trump administration and the American people will be pleased with an outcome there?
Thank you. I'll take that up, but with your permission, I'll go back to what Professor Popowski was saying regarding a ceasefire. In fact, yesterday, my think tank, we have put out a press release. We've sent it to the White House also. We've sent it to Reuters and all also, saying that if Trump can enable a 30-day ceasefire immediately in this summit, guns falling silent, we propose that he be nominated for the Gandhi Peace Prize. Non-violence, Gandhi, 30 days, well, we could do that. I mean, India could consider, at least my think tank, we will kind of move this nomination if we can. 30 days ceasefire in this meeting. But yes, the chances of that are low, but let us see. Now, coming to what the Russian delegation is saying, yeah, I mean, there are two tracks happening here. Russia-Ukraine whole equation and formula is one thing, but for Putin, number one or first is overall Russia-America relations. In a sense that great powers, let us divide the world between us. This is my area of influence, this is your area of influence. Embassies are opening up. It was announced, I think, the US and Russia are both kind of, reviving the embassies and missions in Washington, D.C. and Moscow. Some of that opening up, some discussions on exploration of the Arctic, some discussions on the potential of the Siberian, oil fields, minerals and all, etc., and many such. So for Russia, that is the first element. And then, of course, like removal of sanctions on Russia so that Russia is back into the Committee of Nations. So that's one. And then second, yes, Ukraine is the issue, no doubt. But the Russians would first want to kind of, layer up a normalization or a progress or a working situation with the United States in terms of Russia-US relations and global affairs. And then move on to, not then move on, maybe it will be happening in parallel, but this would definitely, there would be these two tracks of discussions.
Yes, Professor Popovsky, I wanted to bring you back in here. We've had mixed messages throughout the week and what this summit is really going to be about. We've heard previously Donald Trump state that there would be discussions about swapping territories, to then later on saying this is a simple listening exercise about what Russia does actually want from this conflict in order to achieve a longer peace. What do you think Donald Trump could offer Putin that Zelensky would accept, especially now we've heard that this, a third angle to this, which is that the talks are here to restore US-Russia ties and not a long-term peace deal for Russia-Ukraine solely?
Yes, Thomas, I fully agree with what also Ravinder Sachdev said, that Russians will try to avoid the talk on Ukraine and move to global issues, to bilateral relations, to trading, because all of this legitimizes Putin in power, makes him looking good, somebody who is normal, who can be trusted and so on. So the Russians will say, Ukraine is just one of the many, many, many topics in the agenda, and they will try to avoid any commitment on Ukraine. Now, on your question, over the last week, we've seen very different messages, but by the way, this is very normal for the White House. For the last 7 months, we hear different messages every week. They change their mind every week. So there is nothing surprising there. But the meeting, the video conference which Donald Trump had with the European leaders on Wednesday, and after that we've seen no talks at all about territorial swaps, already mean that he was firmly told by President Macron, by Keir Starmer, by Friedrich Merz, and by the Europeans, that he should not talk at all about territory. And because of that, we've seen no such a language anymore. And Donald Trump reduced his ambition as to say, I will simply listen to what Russians want, which is very clear what Russia wants. It's no secret at all what Russia wants. What Russia wants is to destroy Ukraine as a state and to make it as a puppet government, which they can control. That's the ultimate goal of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. For that matter, he will never agree to withdraw, he will never stop the fire, and he will continue with his imperialist agenda. By the way, Russia has no way to get out of this conflict, because there will be a lot of questions to Putin himself Well, why he get into this conflict in the first place? Those questions he cannot answer. Why he lost 1 million Russian soldiers in a useless war where Russia achieved nothing? And nobody will accept any territorial swaps. Ukraine is very firm. All the European partners are very firm. 80% of the world is very firm. It's international law, it's United Nations Charter.
Okay.
Countries should not be allowed, never, with aggression, with war crimes, to get a kilometer of extra territory. And that's what the international law is about. And
Okay.
Donald Trump should tell exactly this to Vladimir Putin. Stop the fire, get out of Ukraine, and only then we can talk about everything else. We can talk about bilateral relations,
Yes.
trade,
Professor.
opening ambassadors, and everything else. But first of all, stop the fire, get your troops out of Ukraine, and that's when we become normal partners.
Yes, Professor Popovsky, we have some further information for our audience coming from the Ukrainian president, where he says that Russia's latest attempt to show military strength in the east has failed. He added that Friday's strikes on Ukraine continued even as Moscow prepares for a high-stakes summit with President Donald Trump. Zelensky says there are still no signals from Russia to stop the war, but expressed hope that a planned three-way meeting could bring effective solutions to the ongoing conflict. We're now joined by Joshua Barnes, who's an anchor and correspondent. Joshua, he is going to give us some more information on these statements, these concerns from the Ukrainian president as we lead up to this summit.
Of course, the situation surrounding these talks are pivotal, but ultimately the US acknowledged this yesterday as well, with Marco Rubio and Donald Trump talking about a potential three-way summit or even two-way summit just between Russia and Ukraine. It will be very difficult for a peace deal to be agreed without Ukraine present. There are some key areas in which they are standing firm on, including not ceding any territory to Russia. Ukraine will need to be at these meetings to draw out lines if there is any territory exchange, or if there are red lines that need to be drawn from both countries, with compromises then found in the middle. I think this is ultimately a logical point, and one that most countries will agree with. I think Europe are very clear that they say Ukraine needs to be at the negotiating table as well. Donald Trump yesterday even suggesting that this could be the first meeting with a follow-up then involving Ukraine and then leading to an actual peace deal. So a lot to look at here. This meeting, of course, is important, but without Ukraine there, I don't think any peace deal will be agreed. And Ukraine, of course, will want to have their say as well. Let's look now at Zelensky's other comments, specifically relating to strikes that are still ongoing. And we do expect this, of course. When no ceasefire has been agreed, we do expect a continuation of military action like we have seen in recent weeks and months. The battlefields won't stop. There won't be a truce while these discussions are taking place. But it is interesting to see what Zelensky has said, and he's used these strikes that are continued from Russia to say this is evidence that Russia doesn't want peace, a rhetoric that Ukraine and Western allies have continuously said. Their message is Russia are playing a game with the US. They're stringing the US along and President Trump along. Ultimately, their goal is to continue an offensive in Ukraine and potentially take more land. Zelensky echoing these comments once again. No major developments, but of course some coming out the Ukrainian president's mouth ahead of this summit. There is weight on them.
Well, thank you, as always, for providing that context on those statements. We now move on for some more information. French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have agreed to meet after Friday's high-stakes Alaska summit between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The LC Palace confirmed the plan but gave no date nor location, saying the two leaders maintain continuous and close dialogue. Zelensky has been in intensive diplomacy this week, meeting German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in Berlin, who hosted a virtual meeting of European leaders alongside Donald Trump, and then latest British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London. Not invited to the Alaska meeting, though. Zelensky has repeatedly warned against any decisions being made without Ukraine and has ruled out ceding territory for peace. We are once again joined by Professor Popovsky. How crucial have these European allies been to Ukraine throughout this 3-year war, Professor Popovsky? We've obviously seen a change in stance and also a change in president in regards to the United States, but the importance and also strength of European allies when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to military strength, economic strength. How do you analyze this?
Europeans are very united like never before. All the European Union members, but other countries as well, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea. As I said, 80% of the countries in the world strongly support Ukraine. Half of them support Ukraine with military. There are 55 countries in the world supporting Ukraine with military supplies and support. And a lot of them also accuse and impose sanctions on that. Ukraine is very strong here, absolutely no doubt. Very few countries support actually Russia, only North Korea, Iran, Belarus, China, more talking rather than doing much in support of Russia. So the world is very clear. The public opinion is very clear. Everybody in the world is very clear who is wrong, who is right here. And for the meeting between the three of them, Zelensky, Putin, and Trump, actually, it's not a new idea. During the rounds of negotiation in Istanbul, this came up. Zelensky didn't mind such a meeting. Putin was very silent. And I would expect that if Trump insists on such trilateral meeting, just to please Donald Trump, Putin may accept that, just to show tomorrow how great the meeting finished. But later, a week later, Putin will say, I will meet Zelensky if, one, we have an agreement, if two, there is something to sign, and he will play and accuse Zelensky of the failure of that trilateral meeting. So everything Putin says in 7 hours means nothing tomorrow. By the way,
Yes.
Everything Trump can say in 7 hours will mean nothing tomorrow. These two, Putin and Trump, can change their mind tomorrow, and whatever they say in 7 hours will mean zero development, because those two cannot be trusted. They have proven, even if they sign with pen a paper, that paper is useless because they can change it a week later. So don't expect much to happen in Alaska.
Rabinda Sachdev, I wanted to come to you next. It's been over 80 years now since the Yalta Conference of 1945, where we saw three huge political figures meet to discuss hugely influential things. Do you think his history is telling us that we're looking at a new Yalta-style division of influence here going into these talks?
What Putin wants. But let us see what emerges. What I define this as, post-COVID and after the Russia-Ukraine war, to my mind, the world is what I describe as a new world matrix under construction. There's a matrix. Countries are figuring out, recalculating their relationships, their geopolitical interests, their economic interests. It's in a flux right now. It's under construction. Like in a construction site, you have men at work, that placard hanging. So if some planetary, journeyer would be passing by planet Earth, they would see this placard hanging out there, a new world order under construction. That's what's happening in the world today. That is one. Secondly, yes, Putin would very much like for Russia to be back in the play, in the world order, along with America, or carve out some areas of influence out there. But it really is, it seems that there's a dead end or a log jam. You see, the thing which is happening, by the way, with Trump and Trump's diplomacy, the issue is, normally in normal previous eras, when world leaders would meet, their assistants would fine-tune with each other counterparts, all discussion points, line up, dot the I's and cross the T's, and make the documents ready. Both sides agreed, and then the leaders would meet, right? And then, yeah, show whatever agreement done. In Trump's case, what he wants to negotiate himself, right? So that's why he says, I will meet Putin and I will negotiate with him. I will sit down with Zelensky and I will negotiate with him. That's where American foreign policy is running into, complications. Because you go back to the Zelensky meeting in the White House, right, when he got such a, drubbing down. Ideally, before Zelensky had come to Washington, D.C., Ukrainian officials and American officials should have sat down, figured out what is to be, achieved as an outcome in this meeting. The mineral deal, at that time it was that, $500 billion of minerals of Ukraine, etc., or a peace. Apparently, Zelensky came in thinking he's going to be talking about a peace deal. Trump was thinking of wanting to finalize a minerals deal. So the gap, I think, which is happening is this, that Trump wants to negotiate himself directly with other world leaders. And that's why each meeting with any world leader can be unpredictable, because Trump may agree, may not agree with that world leader, or that world leader may or may not agree with Trump. So the outcomes are very unpredictable. Whereas in the normal course of diplomatic processes, the aides, the senior aides, the Secretary of State, the foreign minister, the national security advisor of both the countries would have had quick few rounds, sorted out, or come to a conclusion. We cannot come to a conclusion, so there was no need for this Alaska meeting. Or they would have done their homework and said, okay, fine, if the leaders just have to meet for some final yes, no, one way or the other.
Yes.
So the issue is that with respect to Trump's foreign policy, he wants to negotiate directly.
Yes, Rabinder Sachdev and Professor Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour, but we will, of course, bring you all the updates coming out of Alaska and beyond. For more international news updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.